Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Capital Live event brought to you by Spotlight PA. Thank you so much for joining us in this very important conversation. For those of you who don't know, Spotlight PA is an independent, nonpartisan newsroom that covers the state government in Pennsylvania as well as urgent statewide issues. Unlike other newsrooms, our essential public service and accountability journalism is funded entirely by grants and readers like you. For those of you who are already members and support our work, a big heartfelt thank you for making public service events like this one possible. If you are not yet a member and you value events like this one, please do take a moment after today's event and become a member. Journalism supported by facts, science, and the truth is as important as ever in Pennsylvania and across our country, especially amid the continuing rise in partisanship and rampant misinformation in our politics. To support Spotlight PA, visit spotlightpa.org/donate. A few other housekeeping items. Thank you to all who have sent questions in advance. If you have not and would like to submit one, you can use the Q&A feature right here in Zoom to ask a question. To do so, simply click the Q&A icon in the bottom of the toolbar and type in your question. I will moderate the questions in the background and we'll get to as many as possible. Second, we want to let you know we're recording today's event, so those who are unable to join us can catch up later. And last but not least, I'm excited to introduce today's guests. Our state system of higher education is facing a confluence of unprecedented challenges. The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted learning for tens of thousands of students and posed unique challenges to keeping them and the wider community around them safe from infection. At the same time, the system has faced scrutiny for its past handling of racism on campus and is under pressure to chart new and bold solutions for supporting students of color and denouncing hate. And on top of all that, the system is undergoing a major redesign to combine universities and achieve significant cost savings. That's a whole lot of work, and it's being led by today's guest, Dr. Daniel Greenstein, Chancellor of the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. He will be interviewed today by Yasmin Piper, a PASSHE graduate and Temple University Engagement Fellow with Spotlight PA. Once again, I want to remind everyone in attendance that if you have a question, you can use the Q&A feature right here in Zoom, and we'll get to as many as possible. And otherwise, I'm going to step out of the way and turn it over to Yasmin.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Chancellor, again, for being here today. I know you're pretty busy, so we appreciate it. So we have a lot of ground to cover, as Chris said, so we're just going to jump right in. PASSHE experienced a fall semester like no other, with schools transitioning to remote learning and implementing new restrictions. So what are some of the most important lessons you have learned from the fall semester, and how has that reshaped the way you guys plan the spring semester?
Oh, that's great. Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks everyone for attending and submitting questions, which I look forward to, and Happy New Year. It's off to quite the exciting start. So I think a couple things. We took a decision, early summer to really devolve responsibility to our presidents to determine, how they were going to approach the fall within broad guidelines provided by the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and then supplemented with a few things that, were unique to the state system. And, in the end, I think it proved to be the right thing to do. That the approaches were modestly different from place to place, largely in terms of the density of students that were accommodated in on-campus housing. And to a certain extent, reliance on in-person instruction. But it really allowed universities to create experiences that were specific to the to the region, to the health provision that's available to their facilities that are all different. And on the whole, it worked really well. I'm pleased. It was what a horrific thing to have to do, and horrific for everybody and for our students. And everyone showed remarkable resilience and grit and determination. And we actually had some good results by and large. Nothing, obviously, anyone wants to repeat again. I think going into the next semester, you'll see sort of largely a repeat of what happened before. I think depending on where this current spike goes, universities may be in a position in February to invite more students back to living on campus, perhaps, but it really remains to be seen. At the moment, it's pretty much business as was.
Well, what were some of the lessons specifically that the system has learned, just from maybe trial and error?
I think that having a plan is really important, and being able and executing against the plan and being able to shift where necessary. Lock Haven made a shift, had to pause face-to-face activities for a couple of weeks. Bloom made a shift early on. Most of our universities didn't. I think that was good. I think the obvious lessons that were learned across the rest of higher education, that we have a lot more students that are living in our midst in campus facilities, in campus housing. We have a lot, the kind of behavioral expectations are easier to enforce, as it were, on campus as opposed to off campus. But we were fortunate in both cases. People took different approaches to instruction, to testing and contact tracing, and yet had very similarly good results. So I'm not sure that those lessons are there to be learned yet. I have seen the national literature, which suggests that obviously extensive testing and contact tracing is more rather than less beneficial, although our universities seem to have done very well with a variety of approaches. So I think there's still lessons to be learned, Yasmin.
So you brought up that the PASSHE as a whole did not have a unified plan at all. Some students felt that disagreed with this approach. What would you say to those students?
I guess I'm not sure you'd have to say a little bit more about the disagreement. The students that I spoke to when I visited all of our universities virtually, of course, and spent a lot of time with students at each. And, I think that the circumstances were, and my daughter, to be perfectly honest, is a sophomore in college. This has been a tough semester for students. This is not the college life that they signed up for. They've, I think, demonstrated remarkable resilience, but the kind of level of student engagement that is available when everybody's together has not been there. And I think that was the overall complaint. At least the one that I heard. And how did after a sort of a day-long Zoom meetings in your educational activities, how do you then reach out to students through associations and clubs and yet more Zoom meetings? I think engagement was a difficult issue, and was, I think, nationally.
So for some universities like Kutztown, Indiana, and Bloomsburg, they had very high coronavirus case counts. Were they given any additional guidance for the spring semester?
They followed the guidance that was, we all followed the guidance. So we did have a common framework. And that framework was provided by the Pennsylvania Department of Education, like I said, supplemented. And their case counts were well within the guidelines. In fact, Bloom and Lock Haven both made a shift well in advance of reaching the kinds of levels of infection that were in the guidelines.
From what I'm hearing, that's from what students told me, that having these case counts in the hundreds, it made them feel very uncomfortable, like they were unsafe on campus. What do you say to these students?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had not heard that, and I spent quite a bit of time with students. And students' experiences were very different. And again, in the meetings that I had, we went, we were very careful to sort of try to identify who was living on campus and on-campus housing, who was living off campus, who was off campus, in some private, private accommodation that they had rented, who was living with their families or at home or, at some distance. And those experiences were all incredibly different. There wasn't a uniform experience. The students that I spoke to who were on campus, in campus housing, I think felt very secure. I think, perversely, I think if there was I think they may have also felt the pinch of the kind of restrictions on their movements and abilities to do things more than other students would have. So there were trade-offs to be had all over the place. But but again, what came out of the conversations that I had with students, and this was true, I think, again, across higher education, was the level of engagement was really difficult to sustain. And I think that's a challenge going forward into the next semester.
But again, for these students who are feeling unsafe, what specific message do you have for them? Because there are students who are feeling unsafe on campus.
Yeah, and I guess my question would be, where do they feel unsafe, right? If they're in off-campus housing and they're feeling unsafe, that's really something that they will need to attend to in terms of the kinds of arrangements they make.
For students on campus.
That I had not heard that. I mean, I have not heard that. And if that, I mean, that does not. So if there are students out there who are feeling tentative about on-campus housing, that has not been a source. In fact, if you look at the infection rates, they seem to be more off-campus than on-campus. I think our campuses are very secure in that regard. Again, so I think with respect of mitigating the risks of a pandemic, I think our universities have done very well. I think also you'll see in this term, and this is true again nationally, a higher availability of testing, simply because there's just more testing available. And that, of course, I think it does a number of things. One, obviously enables the community to have a better sense of where it is with respect to infection rate, but it also provides a sense of security is the wrong word, but if I'm feeling unwell, or if I feel like I've just been exposed, I can go find out much more easily, hopefully in the next term than perhaps was true in the past. But these are, I mean, the other thing, and I can, again, from my own personal experiences, my own family and friends of daughters, these are deeply personal experiences and the choices that students make about where to live during their experience, they're deeply personal. And I would encourage folks to speak with their families and speak with their friends as they make those decisions, and obviously provide the best, get the best information they possibly can.
Yeah, Chancellor, I'm glad that you brought up that most of the campus case counts were from students off campus. So a recent report from the CDC says that 18 and 24-year-olds continue to test positive more than other age groups, and reopening colleges contributes to the communal spread of the virus. What do you say to communities around these campuses that are holding in-person sessions?
Again, I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm getting old. I'm going to sound like my dad used to when I was a student, I guess. I don't think, I think the national dialogue, unfortunately, has shifted to all or nothing solutions. And I think they pose a sense of false choices. I mean, if you think about it in terms of the economy, it's unfortunately the choices have been posed as, we either lock ourselves down and protect ourselves from the virus, or we have economic development and economic, growth and continuity. And there's an element of that that's sort of come into to play with respect to higher education. It's all on campus and face-to-face, or it's all remote. And in reality, that's not the case. That, and I can only speak for our universities, the lion's share of instruction was not face-to-face. It was remote. Even in universities where there was face-to-face instruction, again, most of the face-to-face instruction was also available to students who preferred to attend it remotely, if that makes sense.
There were a large number of in-person classes, though, and specifically at Kutztown University, there were community members who were concerned about the spread of that virus. So what would you say to those?
There was a very small number of very vocal community members, and I did attend actually virtually a meeting, I think, when 25 people showed up and were very uncomfortable. But I mean, I and I appreciate that these are scary times. And and then I did a town hall, I guess, or an open forum where, again, many of the members of that small group participated and spoke up very vociferously, and I honor and respect their ability to do that. My encouragement to them is I guess, my would be the same today, is that, I just don't think we help each other when we sort of pose these false choices. I think these are really difficult personal decisions that people need to make. And I think, working together to navigate towards the most effective paths to continuing our students' ability to proceed towards their degree while mitigating risk is something that we've demonstrated our ability to do, including at Kutztown. And so, I'm hoping that folks can find those common ground a little more easily, perhaps this semester than maybe they did last.
Yeah, but it's proven that in-person instruction can increase this community spread. Are you saying that the value of that instruction for students outweighs the risk of the greater community?
I'm not sure I've seen that proof, Yasmin. I'm just not sure I've seen that proof. I just don't think we know that much.
Of the community spread?
I haven't seen, I mean, and you may be more advanced in your research than I haven't seen anything that draws a line between in-person instruction and community spread. I have seen some research which shows that the presence of students in a university has contributed to community spread, but I don't think it's gone. I haven't seen anything that goes as far as to say that that actually is a result of in-person instruction.
Yeah. So you told me that you did have a town hall meeting, but given some of the dire circumstances of the semester and probably the spring semester as well, many students have tried to access you, but their questions haven't been answered. Did you know? Were you aware of this?
I haven't. I get plenty of email, Chancellor at PASSHE, and I encourage people to write. And I certainly respond to the email that I get. I meet regularly with our presidents of our student associations. I'm deeply engaged with students who participate in town halls, but I also have meetings on campus with students. So I'm pretty available. So I'm not aware of people reaching out to me and not getting a response. And everything I see comes directly to, if it goes to Chancellor at PASSHE.edu, it comes directly to me. I read my own email.
Is there any plans to maybe widen the range of communication for this upcoming semester?
Well, so given that most of the action is local, and the decision making is local. And I'm also not aware of universities being anything less than open to input from all constituencies. So if you're talking about communication with administration at the universities, that's something that you want to take up with the presidents. Although what I see is very good. And very open and very transparent. I'm not sure how I could be more open insofar as I read all the email that I get and welcome it. So I hope I'll get a bump as a result of this conversation. But I'm always open to suggestion. Again, we have tried to, because our universities are responsible for, and because they're different, we're really trying to encourage that most of the communication takes place at the local level, because what's happening at Mansfield is just fundamentally different than what's happening at, I don't know, name another, Edinburgh or Clarion. With respect to the approach to the pandemic, our communication out of the system office has really been, just kind of update on the sort of broad guidelines and some of the higher level issues. But the decision making in this regard, as with many things in a system, the chancellor doesn't have that much authority, to be perfectly honest, and shouldn't. The CEOs of the campuses are their presidents, and that's right and proper. That especially with regard to the pandemic.
So you're saying if someone has a question, just email to you.
If they have a question that I can answer, again, with the caveat that with respect of the pandemic, the decision making, and I think again appropriately, has been delegated, and it's true with most things. I mean, our university presidents are the CEOs of their institutions. They run them well. They're very different. I mean, when I got here, I encountered a narrative about Pennsylvania state system schools being all the same, and they're anything but. I mean, I know that I think you were at East Stroudsburg. I don't know whether you've spent time at other universities, and they do share many things in common, but they're also very profoundly different. And so the structure that we have, in my view, I think is absolutely right. That the decision-making authority, that the student experience, the sort of the academic program, the supports that are in place, the internships, the advising, the supports, the clubs are all largely local, and that's good.
All right, let's get back to talking about the COVID-19 pandemic and how it impacted the system. So what financial impact did the pandemic have on PASSHE universities? And what is the system's plan to make up for it?
So the answer is not good. And it wasn't good anywhere across higher education. And then more frustrating, I think, is that I cannot tell you, I don't have the most recent data, which I will have in about in a few weeks, because we have to factor in the enrollments for the current term, the one that's about to start, the housing complement for the current term, and then also the think through the distribution of the stimulus funding was just recently approved. So so I can't give you the most recent numbers, but the last best data I had was really just before the start of fall term. And with what was then CARES and other stimulus funding, we were about 32 million in the hole across the system. That situation hasn't gotten better, although our enrollments, frankly, were as in, our enrollments in the fall were good, were strong. And, of course, we had anticipated, and other universities experienced much weaker enrollments. So, touch wood, and let's hope that continues.
So what is the system's plan to make up for those lost funds, though?
This probably goes to a conversation about the system's overall financial health and trajectory. Universities, the only way out of the situation we're in eventually is that we have to grow out of it. Just forget the pandemic. Rule of thumb, universities have to grow their revenues our universities have to grow their revenues at about 4% a year just to tread water, right? And it doesn't matter whether those revenues come from student tuition or fees and room and board, or whether, it matters, but or it comes from the state. But the overall revenue growth has to travel at that number just to stay level. And of course, it hasn't been doing that. And what's happened is we've been basically spending down our reserves for years. And so we were already in a pretty significantly challenged situation before the pandemic. And we had, I think, and have some very, robust and very effective plans to get through it. But the pandemic is just going to force us to accelerate the work. It's going to impact, it is going to accelerate the financial deterioration that we were already experiencing. Thank goodness we got started several years ago to begin to address those problems head on, because I wouldn't want to have to be started today. We have a lot of runway and we have a lot of momentum, and that's a good thing. And I'm confident we'll get through it. It's, I think we will get back to growth because, look, public higher education is worth fighting for, and we're good, and we have good people, creative people. And I think we believe in the mission. And I think we see as not just within the university, but across the state, we see the power of public higher education.
Right. So now I want to talk about another issue the system faces, which is racism within the 14 state schools.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, a Spotlight PA feature highlighted how students of color often feel unsafe or even ignored at the PASSHE schools due to reoccurring racist incidents on campus, lack of faculty of color, and overall lack of support from the universities and the system. So what part of the PASSHE redesign will be dedicated to addressing racism and racial inequality on campuses that go beyond past efforts?
Yeah, so a couple of points. So one of them is that everything about system redesign is focused on ensuring our students' success for all of our students. So, there isn't anything about system redesign that should not also address, issues of race. It's not just about race prejudice. I don't mean to underemphasize the importance of that. There's also, I think we need to look very closely at attainment gaps. Our Black and brown students don't succeed as well as our white students. So it isn't just about race and race prejudice. So system redesign as a whole is really designed to improve the success of all of our students. So at some basic level, I think the whole thing addresses issues of inequity, and not just inequity by race. In addition, we have, as I think really begun to pull together and work at a system level, leveraging some exceptionally strong work that our universities have been doing for some time to attack issues of specifically, again, issues of race prejudice, and also inequity in student outcomes. And just over the summer, we kind of combined forces, and I appointed a vice chancellor and a chief diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. And it wasn't because we just discovered that this was a problem. It was because we recognized that we would get further working together as a system. So the reason to sort of put that emphasis at the system level is to provide a coordinating point for the good work that's happening across the campuses. And we've made some we've made progress, and I don't want to oversell, because this is super hard. It's really important, and this is a long road and a long journey, and it's hard work. But I'm proud of what we've accomplished in advance of our attacking these issues at the system level. And I'm proud of what we've accomplished really only in 4 or 5 months, just sort of gearing up to take on the work in a system way. And we can talk about some of that.
So what initiatives exactly is your new Chief Diversity Officer, which is Dr. Denise
Yep.
Pierce, I believe. What initiative is she working on currently?
So a couple things, which, and I'm going to talk about the things which are furthest along. One of them is to really put in place, and it's kind of boring drains and toilet stuff, but it's super important stuff. This doesn't happen. You have to organize people and processes to make it happen. And of course, we had none of that stuff in place, right? So a lot of the work is like, okay, let's put in place pointing to knees. All of our universities now, and this is pretty significant, have a chief diversity officer at the cabinet level, a direct report to the president, bringing those people together as a kind of a community who are meeting regularly to identify, what are our priorities, but how can they work together to channel their success, shining a really bright and uncomfortable light on the kind of inequities that we're talking about, not just in terms of the gaps in student attainment, whether persistence, graduation rates, or whatever, but also looking at our staff and our faculty and look at the composition, the demographic composition. I mean, when I say shining a bright light, I'm like, put your head in the mirror and hold it there so that we can't escape, right? We cannot duck. All of that is in place. I mean, it has been put in place unless I've been working on it for some time, but obviously, so, now we've got dashboards that are instantly available. You can see in real time. I think, and the research shows that universities, institutions that don't actually, you begin with the data, because unless you begin with the data, you cannot continue to address or improve upon the problem. We've done some other, I think, really important work, again, in a short time. We're just about to launch, or we have launched, it'll be a kind of a mandatory training for all constituencies across campus. Cultural competencies are not something that people just, wake up one morning and we've got them, right? It is about dialogue. It is about learning, and we are learning organizations. So we've engaged some pretty good learning materials. There's already good work on the campuses, but we thought there would be advantages to using the same kind of learning platform. So that's now just getting rolled out. I'm excited about that. We've taken very seriously. I mean, this is, again, long before my time. I want to be clear about that. This is not something new that was just discovered at the Chancellor's office. But we've taken very seriously issues of free speech, issues of hate speech, issues of racist speech. Indiana University of Pennsylvania and the Free Speech Project is probably, is nationally, and should be nationally, known for the work that it's done. So this is not new, but we've now begun to say, okay, what can we learn from work at Indiana and other places so that we can illuminate incidents and provide students an opportunity to report on incidents, and then mobilize communities so that they can be responsive to them. So I think that's important. I think a lot of the kind of student success, how do we support students so that they can, continue making progress to their degree? We've been, that is the area we have been most active in over time, quietly, actually making some headway. That's showing up in mostly in first and second year retention rates, but it's slow going. But I'm not unhappy. So I think all of those things will continue to push forward. Longer term, and these, now I'm going to go into the realm of Dan's aspirations, or I'm even going to invoke Denise Pearson, Vice Chancellor Pearson's aspirations. Wouldn't it be great to see how far we could get diversifying the curriculum? And many of our faculty do great work, but I'm sure we could do more. How can we go faster in terms of diversifying our staff and faculty, so that our students, especially at places like ESU, but at other universities, look increasingly like Pennsylvania in terms of our access and the complexion of our students. We are as diverse as the state, in some cases much more so. How do we do that with our faculty and staff? So those now we're getting into those longer term aspirational things, but you'll see those thrusts as well.
So is the system actively working on recruiting more faculty of color?
Well, recruiting. So we're always obviously hiring, but we're in a downturn, and we're actually shrinking. So this is a problem. And it just is a problem. So it's something we're going to, there are always opportunities to refresh, but we're not in growth mode. And not being in a growth mode, being in a contraction mode, it means that, you know, where posts are vacated by retirement or whatever, they're not necessarily filled. So that doesn't mean that we're not filling any posts either, but it does limit our opportunities in that regard. And that's, you know, so it slows our progress, put it that way. And yes, I think there are significant efforts to diversify at every level, not just faculty, but also staff, leadership levels, et cetera. Yeah.
So this was a submitted question. Someone said that Dr. Pearson has not yet met with students of color in the 14 state schools. Is that true?
It's certainly not true, because I have been there in the room. She attended all of my virtual meetings with students, and she's been very active. She went up to Bloom to meet with students. First of all, she's wonderful, and you should, I'm plugging her, and hope that you have an opportunity through this venue or others to speak with her. But yeah, she's way out there. I mean, out there, you know, very much actively, sleeves rolled up, engaged. And she's, you know, oh, now I'm gonna get all teary. She's very authentic in a way that, I mean, there are different approaches to this work, and hers is really as much from her heart as from her head. Very authentic.
But has she met separately and specifically with students of color to address, you know, racism on their campuses?
Yep. Yes.
What were some of the things that came out of those meetings?
So, you know, she's been here since August. So some of the things I've spoken about, I think the community response kind of teams, the mechanisms that enable us to report those experiences more, that's a direct response. But I think, and I'll speak for me as well as Denise, because we have a shared experience of both of us being, you know, not having, you know, being relatively new to Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And frankly, being relatively new to, you know, and I've said this publicly, my experience of work in social justice and equity areas has really been urban. I didn't realize till I got here that, you know, and it's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just a thing. And the challenges that I had focused on had been challenges that you see most prominently in an urban setting. I hadn't really experienced these issues in a rural setting until I got here. It's different, and coming to terms with those issues and trying to sort of figure out what are the responses and what are the approaches really requires a lot of listening and learning. And so I think, you know, so I can't speak for Denise and would encourage you again to speak to her, but certainly yes, speaking to students does help frame specific initiatives clearly, but maybe as importantly, it generates understanding. And that's really, that's a learning journey, and it's an important one to take.
So part of the racial reckoning we're facing as a nation is an acceptance of responsibility that people and institutions have played in upholding systematic racism. What role do you think PASSHE has played historically in failing to address racism? And have you examined the system's history to understand the role it has played?
Oh gosh, what a great what a great question. I have not, Yasmin. That's and I'm a historian, so I'm ashamed to have to admit that. Mm-hmm. You know, beyond obviously, you know, having a general understanding of our university's history, and particularly the history of Cheney, but I haven't followed or traced, and should, and I'm going to make a mental note too. I haven't, you know, really gone back, you know, into the interwar years. Probably would be the place I would start. Certainly in the post-Second World War era. To see that. No, I mean, and no, it's a great point. And there's lessons to be learned, undoubtedly.
So how can you properly address racism now without understanding the role the system has played in the past?
That's a great question. I'm not sure Yeah, that's a great question. I'm approaching, I'm going to try. I think, and I'm going to try this as an answer and push back. I think fundamentally it's important to understand, and this was, go back to the reference about the learning journey about, how racism manifests itself. In my case, the learning for me has been in rural areas or in less urban areas, suburban areas. Yeah, I think it's a natural extension to then understand over time what role our universities have played or what roles they have played. My familiarity is really through the experience of our alumni, of our graduates. And it's a very mixed, it's a fascinating and mixed record because, I won't name names because I don't want to embarrass people, but, there are graduates of our universities, in their 70s and 80s, and then in their 20s and everything in between, who are Black and brown, who will talk openly and often very emotionally about how our universities saved their lives. I mean, not in the way that hospitals save lives, obviously, but in terms of the way that they lifted them up and set them on trajectories. And, these are people who you can find on our councils of trustees, you can find as elected members of the General Assembly, you can find in the administration, you can find in who are employees of our universities and even presidents. And those stories are profound. And they're moving. And then you can, and I've heard these as well, hear stories from across the same age group of people who did not find that experience, found quite a different experience, often a negative one. And I guess for me, the question is, how do you do this in terms of asset framing? The question for me is how did that magic work for the people for whom it worked? And it is magic. And when you listen to those stories, it's magical. And how can we replicate that so it happens more often for more? I mean, the fascinating thing to me about public higher education is it is something that is so worth fighting for because those stories are so powerful and they are so real. And it's not about, and it is a question of how do you then make sure that magic happens for more. So I do think that there is a role to play in terms of understanding both those trajectories, right? And how they have happened over time. Yeah.
For the students today, students of color who are listening today, what promise can you make them in terms of eliminating racism on campus?
Oh gosh, Yasmin, I wish I could promise everybody that I would eliminate racism in this country and across the world. It's 400 years we're trying to undo, and I'm not excusing anything. It's disgraceful what happens when it happens. And it's so fascinating because that magic we just talked about is also very real for students today. So, I think the promises that I'll make are the ones that I can keep. That this is something which has animated my entire working life. It's one of the reasons I get out of bed in the morning. It's one of the reasons I do what I do. And I have built a team around me who feel the same way. And we are dedicated, not just to talking about it, but to doing stuff and making progress and to measuring that progress and being held accountable for the good and the bad. That's why we're public servants. So I'll make that promise.
Thank you, Chancellor. So now we're going to talk about the PASSHE integration. So PASSHE is planning to integrate 6 universities within the system into 2 combinations: California, Clarion, and Edinburgh, and Bloomsburg, Lock Haven, and Mansfield. Can you briefly explain what this integration means?
Sure. So what we're looking at is expanding student opportunity by kind of bringing those 2 groups of 3 together. And let me And the kind of construct that we're starting with, the kind of is, assume a single president, a single leadership team, a single faculty, a single academic program array. And here's the complicated part, in a construct which has 3 universities, each of which maintains its own name, brand, and identity. So that if you go to a Clarion, and Clarion is part of an integrated university, you would still get a Clarion degree. That's the path we're pursuing. Let me just give you a little bit about the rationale. And this is where, again, this is one of the reasons I've had probably even more contact with students over the course of the last several months than would be typical, because student input in this is absolutely critical. What happens at a university as its enrollments decline and it becomes under significant financial pressures is it has to contract in terms of the supports that it can offer its students, in terms of the activities it can offer its students, and ultimately in terms of the academic program. What could, and while it contracts, and if you think about the communities that we've just named, the communities that we serve, they don't need a contract. That community needs the full range of nursing specialties, needs the full range of business majors. So by integrating universities in the way that we've described, are we able to provide those expanded opportunities for those communities and the students who need the most? That is basically the question we're trying to ask. Can we go further with the dollars that we have? And this is where these things take a life on their own. The groups that are planning that, the universities themselves, folks from universities themselves are planning this work. They've become, appropriately in my view, totally focused on, wait a minute, this is not just sort of redesigning let's do what we do now in just in combination. What if we actually were able to do this and cut the cost of our education by 25%? What if we're able to do this in a way that allows us to move our graduation rates by 10%, to move our, right? So it's, what's fascinating to me is that groups are coming together and designing this new thing. They're just saying, wait a minute, let's think, instead of pouring students today into our university constructs, let's build around the students of tomorrow and their needs. So it's, so that's what we're trying to pull off. It's ambitious, but again, even going back to the conversation we just had about race, if you were to design, I mean, not you, but if we were to sit here, if we were to design tomorrow's university, and we were doing that design, adopting an equity lens, which is what's happening, it would probably look different. And so those are the kinds of conversations that are happening now. Instead of, let's not just design, let's not replicate what we're doing. Let's work in a way that addresses the challenges that we know we're facing about affordability, student outcomes, equity.
So what were these universities chosen specifically?
So for different reasons, obviously, a number of them are very significant. When I say financially challenged, it's not like hair on fire kind of financially challenged, but they're in a circumstance where that kind of cycle of contraction that I described earlier is really beginning to present itself. And so it's having the effect of limiting the opportunities that they can provide to their regions. And we were put on this earth to provide opportunities to students in regions. So so that's one reason. But then there are other, universities. Bloom is one of our strongest universities. It's a fabulous place. But in the mix for different reasons to enrich the opportunities that could be available to the region. I mean, we're really looking at building, 2 higher education powerhouses in regions of the state, Northeast and West, where communities really don't have them and deserve them.
What necessitated this major change?
The system in its current construct is not sustainable.
What do you mean by that?
There are not enough. I mean, this is true for the state, not just our system. But if the kind of education that we offer, which is very powerful and has all those magical effects that we just talked about, demand for that kind of education is shrinking. That doesn't mean that, that kind of education will go away. God, I hope it won't. But our state is pretty crowded with higher education supply, and so there's just not room for 14 fully comprehensive residential traditional public universities in the state. Not room. There's not demand that can continue to sustain them, given the operating model, which is one which relies on 75% of our revenues come from student tuition and fees. So I think that's the critical driver. I think the other is that, while that particular segment of the student market, as it were, is shrinking, there are other people out there who really need our help. So there are growth opportunities in other areas that are actually we're looking at very carefully and very deliberately through the work on considering integration. So a couple of examples: 50,000 students every year leave Pennsylvania virtually to take a fully online, low-cost, fully online undergraduate degree program. 50,000. That's real demand that we're not really tapping into in the undergraduate space. There are incredible demands for, I'm going to call it reskilling and upskilling, but, people, adults typically, who don't want a degree, a bachelor's necessarily or a master's degree, but they want some kind of credential that gives them the next bump in their career. Those are huge growth areas, and we have real opportunity and capability in both of those areas. So I think that's an additional layer. So, while we're adjusting to very significant change in the kind of traditional market that we're operating, we're also recognizing that as a public university, there's real serious public need for an affordable option in those two areas. And, we can eventually say, okay, we're not going to serve those students. We're not going to serve those Pennsylvanians. But as a public university, I think of the state, I think we have an obligation to at least say, wow, there's that demand out there and it's not being met. And do we have a role?
Thank you, Chancellor. So this one is a reader question. How do you believe that 25% cost savings will be achieved for students?
I'm not sure anyone said 25% cost savings. I think that the hope would be that the net average price could shrink by 25%. Does that make sense? It's a modest change, but it's 25% cheaper per student. How could that happen? I think it could happen through a number of different ways. And it's in the ways that, and these are not unique to Pennsylvania. So for fully online students, you can immediately discard the costs of a residential university. And actually, most of our cost is not in tuition, but in room and board. There are pathways that one can establish so that even towards a 4-year degree, that starting in one place and moving to another with completing the first year or two in one place, maybe even in a high school through dual enrollment, or in a community college through community college transfer, you can very substantially reduce the net cost of a degree that's available to a student. I think there are any number of innovations that we have not really investigated as fully as we ought to in terms of student supports and student instruction. So there are opportunities there as well, but I'm just naming a few off the top of my head. Doable. It's not doable if the model in our heads is, oh yeah, it's just the same kind of thing we're doing all the time, we'll just do it cheaper. That can happen. We're already pretty good. There's not 25% there to take.
We have another audience question. What will happen to integrated sports and campuses? What will happen to the integrated sports on the campuses under consideration for the merger?
You're going to kill me. So the answer to that question, so we have asked so the way we're doing this planning, implementation planning, is that it's really been devolved. The responsibility has been devolved to the groups of universities. So there's a lead president in each region. They're working closely with their presidents, and they have working groups, including a working group in athletics. And people have volunteered to work in the working groups. I'll tell you the number. It's just south of 1,000, right? Just south of 1,000 people right now in working group. It's amazing. It's really inspiring. So anyway, the athletics group was like, okay, athletic groups, let's look at this. Or what are the costs and benefits of the, athletics, having the teams we have, and and also look at the other affordances, right? Because athletes do, and actually it goes to it's a part of the diversity. It's a diversity issue. Athletes do tremendously much better in terms of retention and graduation rates than those who are not athletes. But they have better student outcomes. There are other affordances. If you have athletics programs, they provide opportunities for sport science type courses and programs, et cetera. So anyway, we've asked them to look deeply at all this stuff and make some recommendations about what we got to do. And we're about a week or two away from revealing our direction. And I don't want to get out ahead of the group because they would kill me. But I will say this much. They did substantial and really good work. It's some of the best analytical work I have ever seen. And I've seen a lot in higher education. It makes a really, really interesting and compelling case, which frankly surprised, I'm going to be polite because there's 100 and some people watching, surprised me. And so the results that they produced were just different than what I would have expected going in. And anyway, so we'll be making that available in the next couple of weeks. And I promise I'm going to send you an email, but I don't want to get out ahead of can you forgive me?
All right. Similarly though, what will happen to student services, specifically mental health services?
Yeah, I think with respect of student services and mental health in particular, but not just, students, if one of our biggest challenges goes back to the equity issue, but it's not just about race, it's about race and income and overall student performance. Our universities, they're pretty good. I love them dearly. I mean, they're pretty powerful. That magic is there. If you look at the system as a whole, and there's a lot of a variation, they're above average in terms of student outcomes, average or a little bit above average. Some universities are actually much better than that. Others are right on the line, so there's this variation. But we can do more, right? If the average is about 63 or something, 60, mid 60s, 60 graduation rate, we could get that higher. If the average, first to second year retention is 70+%, mid 70s, we should be in the mid 80s, And so to me, the name of the game in higher education is what can we do to really surround students with the kind of supports they need, any kind of student, not just traditionals, but also non-traditionals, with the supports they need to succeed. The cost of an education is high, right? And so they're highest for students who pay for 1 or 2 years for a partially and then stop out. And so they're left in the labor market without the benefit of having a degree, which has a real benefit in terms of salary, having already invested all, and that's just heartbreaking.
Exactly. So, in the interest of time, though, Chancellor, exactly what will happen to these services? So
supports, health and wellness and supports. I mean, so this is an opportunity for us to redesign in a way that can really begin to address those challenges. So, and I cannot tell you specifically because the work is still being done.
Okay. So this is another reader or audience member submitted question. Is there a plan for a low-cost competitive online undergraduate program that competes with Southern New Hampshire University or Maryland University?
Gosh, in a way, I hope not, because if you think about, and Maryland's a different animal, but Southern New Hampshire's really pursued a model where it's not as sort of faculty intensive as ours is. And there's a role for it. I'm not being, I mean, they do great work and they've grown tremendously and they'll continue to really expand. But, our value is really, I think, in the quality of our faculty. And Southern New Hampshire and other fully online providers have just gone a different route. It's not a bad or a good thing, but so I don't think I hope that's not in our future.
So what would you say to faculty and leadership of the schools that are being integrated? Will they lose their jobs, and how concerned should they be?
My message is really to think about the opportunity and to, the opportunity to engage in really addressing many of the challenges that we've spoken about in wholly new ways. The approaches that we're taking are not delivering the best results for our students, all of our students, and particularly for students from low-income backgrounds, from rural communities, and Black and Brown students. And it's not right. It's not fair. We have an opportunity, and I think it's honestly a blessing, kind of a gift, to spend a moment and say, wow, what could we do different? as public servants, right? As a public institution, and there's power in that. I would focus there. I don't. I would focus there and encourage folks to focus there. I think it's one of the reasons we've got 1,000 people working in our working groups, because that passion is there.
So we discussed the impact of the pandemic, racism on campus, mental health services, and the integration. What is a message you want to say to students and faculty who may still be feeling uneasy about these topics?
Well, oh gosh, I guess there's two things. These are significantly challenging times for all of us, and that's true not just in higher education, but across, almost everything. But I look even in the past several months, and I see evidence, and I don't think it's wishful thinking, Yasmin, that we can do well whatever we put our minds to doing together. Whether it's responding to the pandemic, where the transitions that we made in real speed to ensure our students had opportunity to continue their degrees and mitigate risks, were tremendously powerful. The work that's coming out of our integration groups as they begin to think about, redefining the future of higher education in the interests of our students is tremendously powerful. The work that that we have done at our universities initially and beginning to do now at the system level to address real issues of injustice, tremendously powerful. I see in that more a source of optimism than of concern. And it's, I'm an irrepressible optimist by nature. I can't help myself, but you asked me the question, so I'll tell you how I think.
We have another audience member question here. What do you say to students who have needed mental health services but have been turned away from their school's mental health services due to lack of providers, funding, or availability?
Yeah, I do not. I mean, this is a problem. This is a national problem, and it's heartbreaking when that happens. Universities still rely on very traditional approaches to the provision, not uniformly, but we still rely on very traditional kind of siloed models. It's good, but it doesn't meet the extent of the need that we have, and the need has grown. I wish I don't remember when you graduated, but my guess is the need has grown significantly even since you graduated. When did you graduate?
May 2020.
All right, never mind. I erase that. The need has grown tremendously in the last 10 years. And, and so it is an area where it goes back to this, how do we think about redesigning what we do in the interest of our students? This is an area of tremendous, it's heartbreaking when that happens. And one good tidbit, with the COVID pandemic, in March, because we just went online, bang, went remote, we were very rapidly able to mobilize supports for students who are now remote. And it forced us out of our traditional, and it wasn't a huge success, but it wasn't a huge failure either. But it demonstrates what we can do when we really put our minds to it. And it was, anyone tells me we can't do stuff, that experience from March to, I guess, September, I will always reflect on that and say, I don't believe it. We can do anything we want.
That was our final question. Thank you, Chancellor.
Thank you
for your time. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Thank you both. Thank you to Yasmin. Thank you to Dr. Greenstein, and thank you to all for joining us today. I want to remind you all that this event was a public service of Spotlight PA. At Spotlight PA, we depend on our members to support this essential journalism and to hold the powerful to account and elevate science and the truth over misinformation and partisanship. If you valued today's event, please take a moment now to go to spotlightpa.org/donate and make a contribution. We really appreciate your support. We can't do this without you, and we're eager to see you again for another event soon. So thank you all for joining us. Have a good evening and be safe.